You know, when you see a fire truck driving down the road, you seldom think, oh, they're going to put out the fire in my house. And when you see Medic 1 going by, you don't really think, well, they're coming to save me. But I have a different perspective now, having been on the other side of emergency services.
Thank you guys for being here. You want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, I'm Connor Ensign. At the time, a couple years ago, I was still a high schooler at TUMWATER High School, senior, so really not much going on. But then I was working at the Valley, just started, I think, 2.5 weeks prior to this. So I was like just coming out of training. From what I learned lifeguarding
Awesome.
at the Valley. But yeah, that's what about I was doing.
Right.
And I'm Mark Layton. I've been a physician in town for about 30 years, and I'm a mediocre amateur tennis player, and was down at the Valley on the Saturday morning when this event happened, and I met Connor.
Right on.
Jared Simmons. I work for Tumwater Fire Department. I've been there for 9 years. At the time, I was a firefighter on engine T2 for Tumwater, stationed there with 2 other members of the department that day.
Like I said, AC Bates. I'm a paramedic at Tumwater, paramedic firefighter. So I was on Medic 5, responding out of our headquarters station. So Jared and I were coming kind of across town. So thanks again, kind of before we get too deep, to you guys for being here. I think it's pretty cool that you're willing to participate.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
Especially for you to kind of, yeah, everything's a pleasure these days, I bet, huh? Yeah, it's pretty cool. This all kind of came about as I saw it as an opportunity. We teach a lot of CPR to the high school and middle school students in Tumwater. And to have an example of a high school student from town who actually was able to jump in and be the difference for somebody in trouble, kind of stood out as a really great opportunity to kind of expose that and make it a little more real life for the kids that we're trying to reach. Thanks again to TCTV for putting this together, for Thurston County Medic 1 for making it happen. So yeah, first off, let's talk a little bit. You said, so you were working at the Valley for how long at that time?
Like 2.5 weeks.
2.5 weeks.
Yeah, I just got done with like my training and everything.
Fantastic.
So.
It was your first weekend on duty as a lifeguard.
It was because I like covered one of my friend's shift. He asked me, and it was like my first shift by myself. So.
Awesome.
Yeah.
They hand you the reins right into the fire.
I know. But was not expecting anything like that. But.
Okay. Where did you learn CPR?
So. Basically, if you want to be like a lifeguard or anything like that, the Valley has like this huge course that they put on to be trained as a lifeguard, but that also comes with like your certification with CPR and like AED use and stuff like that. So I mean, I just went into it trying to be like a lifeguard at the Valley, and so through the whole course, like you just get trained for CPR and AED use as well. So.
Very good.
Yeah.
So at that time, as you're going through your CPR course, in your mind, are you thinking, this might be something I'm gonna have to do and jump in and save a life? Or are you thinking like this is a kind of a box I gotta check for this job, or a little bit of both, or how are you thinking that?
I think at the time it was literally just I gotta check this box so I can move on to a certification. Because I mean everybody I talked to at the Valley who'd worked there previously, because like we have these code reds,
Mm-hmm.
They're like, oh, they're never that bad. It's usually like a kid who bumped his head or something. Like, I mean,
Sure.
you guys know that. You're always coming for that sort of stuff. But so I never heard stories of anything happening like drastically like this sort of thing. So in my mind, I was like, it's not going to happen to me or really anytime soon, I feel like. So my mindset wasn't like, oh, I'm going to use this like either every day or as often as that you might.
Sure.
So yeah, that was not my mindset going into it.
Gotcha. So Mark, you mentioned tennis. What else what are you getting into at that time prior to April or March 2017?
Oh, well, I mean, I have
Experience
my family, I have my practice, like to do music, and like to work around the house and garden, so I'm
Pretty active guy.
pretty active.
Sound like you're pretty
active.
healthy leading
Oh,
up
yeah,
to that.
quite healthy. Quite
Kind of
healthy.
no expectation of needing to take it easy or.
I was just kind of
worry
like
about-
hoping to hit the tennis ball a little bit better that morning. I mean, and this is something I've done for many, many years. This was not something that was new. This was sort of a part of a routine, playing tennis on Saturday morning with the guys.
Gotcha. And Jared, like you said, so you'd been there for 9 years at the time, or 9 years now?
9 years now, so 7
years
years at the time.
Awesome. So I'd only been at TUMWATER for I think 2 years, and I've been involved with the CPR program in the schools for probably about a year at that time. And something that we talk about a lot is and really the whole purpose of that CPR program is that we're trying to get to where we have immediate or early bystander CPR, chest compressions, and AED use if possible. Because what we found through the statistics is that really is the thing that makes the difference as to whether or not we have a positive outcome for a patient. So, having high school kids that are able-bodied, able-minded, and mature enough to jump in and make that happen is really what can be the difference between somebody going on and living a long, happy life or never waking up again. So. Having kind of getting your background as far as where you were trained and knowing that it was that recently, that's pretty cool to hear. Okay, so let's dive in a little bit to the day itself. Mark, if you would, what do you remember kind of leading up to the cardiac arrest? What were you up to?
Well, I played tennis at the Valley on Saturday mornings with this group, and we start playing at 8 o'clock, and so. I usually would get to the Valley around 7:15, 7:30 and go into one of the upper gyms and stretch out and maybe a really light jog around the indoor track, but nothing that's really going to raise your heart rate. Mm-hmm. Absolutely nothing that you would call working out or something like that. And so I did that as I had done every single week. And I stopped and I went over to get something out of my athletic bag that was on the floor. And so this was Saturday morning. And then the next thing that I actually remember was Tuesday afternoon when I was being taken off the ventilator and extubated. So that's about what my recollection is.
Okay. Let's get about a 3-day gap there. Mm-hmm. Wow. So what about you, Connor? So you were on duty out of the pool, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So
yeah.
first Saturday on duty as the lifeguard.
Yep.
Ready to protect the whole TUMWATER Valley Athletic Club.
Yeah. I think my shift started. I had to open that day, so it was like 6:30 or something like that. I was just back at the pool doing my job that I thought I was going to be doing every day. When like the code red was called over the radio. So like our process at the Valley or whatever, since I was the only lifeguard on at the time, like I have to wait for somebody to come and like guard the pool while I leave, because I can't just leave people swimming in the pool, So I waited like a couple seconds while people came and
So
like took
real
over.
quick, so when you say code red, what are you actually hearing over the radio? They just say code red, and they tell you anything about it?
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, we've gotten better at that at the Valley, is like explaining a little stuff over the radio, but it was literally just like code red. So when I heard that, I was like, oh, I'm not in a huge rush or anything. Like, I mean, I still got there pretty quick, but it's like I did not think it was going to be something that drastic, because they didn't even tell me over the radio like it was that bad. So I just grabbed like the first aid kit and the AED and like went over to where it was called up in one of the gyms upstairs. And I like walk up there, and then I just see Mark on the ground, and then like 3 or 4 people around him. One's already calling 911. One's like I think, attempting to do CPR, compressions. I just kind of like stood there and I was like, wait, what's going on, you know? And then like the guy looked back at me and he's like, oh, are you certified? And I was like, yeah. And he got out of the way and then I like kind of took over. But
Did you, so based on what you knew about CPR at that time and chest compressions,
yeah.
did you recognize that the bystander that jumped in, did he seem to know what he was doing, or was he?
I don't think I really like took the time to be like, oh, you know, does this guy know what he's doing or not? Because I feel like there is a couple guys. There's like a lot of doctors, obviously, that go to the Valley who would let you know if they are confident in what they're doing. And he like kind of just looked at me and was like, oh, are you certified? And I was like, yeah. And so then he got out of the way, and then that's when I stepped in and like assessed him. And then figured out that, you know, I should be doing CPR as well. So.
Sure. I think that's probably a common feeling for somebody when they find themselves in that position, and somebody maybe a little more qualified, or at least in their opinion, who's maybe a little more ready to do the job gets there. It's that sense of get me out of here, please take this now. You know.
Yeah.
We see it in our job.
Absolutely.
Almost every time we show up on a call with CPR going on, people, hey, it's all yours. So that's what the guy wanted to do with you.
Yeah.
So you kind of realize that the gravity of the situation, that we're dealing with the cardiac arrest, and you've got to do CPR. You know, mentally, emotionally, you start spinning out a little bit at that point?
I mean, it was, adrenaline definitely kicked in, and I was like trying to, I don't think I sat there and was like, you know, oh, I got to do like step 1 or step 2 of this. I just kind of did it. So it was cool that I was like that confident, or just that ready to, you know, I didn't have to sit there and think about, oh, am I doing this wrong, or like what steps to do. I mean, I just like assessed him. Obviously, I like no heart rate, and he was like not even breathing. He was basically like just dark blue on the ground. And so I was like, oh, well, you know, from what I remember, I should be doing compressions. So I just started doing that. And then since we are trained for like ventilations as well, because we have like masks and stuff, I did those too. And then because I was like the only lifeguard on, like I told the bystander, I think, who was attempting to do CPR, how to set up the AED. So told him how to set it up, put the patches on, and then we just listened to it, and obviously tells you what to do. But.
That's an awesome point. So something that we always kind of talk about in our job is you know, when the chips are down, you're dealing with one of those high stress situations, you kind of always just fall back to your training.
Yeah.
That's why we stress the importance of practicing it in our classes, and make sure that people actually get that sensation, the feeling of what doing a good chest compression feels like. And because when that adrenaline's going, and you know, you've got a man who's blue in the face on the ground next to you, it's hard to kind of lock in and walk through your normal mental process you would in a normal environment. You know, you kind of lose that focus, and you fall back to what have you practiced, what have you been taught. That's great. Okay, so you take over chest compressions, you get the AED set up with some help there. You delivered at least one shock, is that right? Just one?
Yeah, just one. Yep.
Great. So in that AED that you guys have, I don't think you have the same model, but it's super straightforward, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's got voice commands, it's got like 3 buttons on it. It'll tell you exactly what to do when you turn it on.
Yeah.
That's great. So that's another thing that we we stress in our classes. All the schools have AEDs available, and all the way down to our 6th graders that we're teaching. You know, this machine is the easiest one you'll ever use. You know, you turn it on and it walks you through it every step. It reminds you when to do compressions, when to shock, and everything else. So that's great. So how long did it feel like to you that you were kind of in charge of that patient care until Jared came around the door with this crew?
It felt a lot longer than it actually was.
5 years, right?
Yeah, because I was doing like compressions and like CPR and all that stuff for a little bit before I was having the guy set it up. So I was like, tell him how to do it while focusing on CPR. So then I was like doing both of those. And then finally, once we delivered the shock and like I kept doing CPR, it felt like forever. So
just eyes on that doorway waiting.
Seriously,
for help to
I was. It did seem like a really long time.
I know that feeling. Those are the calls where I think sometimes we kind of get that question, like, where have you been? From the family members or the bystanders. You know, it's like, we got here in 3.5 minutes.
I know.
To them, it's an eternity.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jared, you come in, you see Connor doing compressions, you see the AED set up. I know for me, when I walk through the door on one of these calls, when we get cardiac arrest dispatch, and I see that we've got work being done, and especially if you can comment on the quality of his compressions, things like that. Those are things that immediately my optimism for this patient's chances goes through the roof.
Yep.
One thing we talk about in our CPR courses is roughly 10% of chance of survivability for a patient in cardiac arrest is lost every minute that nobody intervenes and does chest compressions. And to have somebody who's trained, albeit 2.5 weeks prior, somebody who's trained in doing effective chest compressions, I immediately kind of get that warm and fuzzy feeling like we got a really good chance here. So yeah, walk us through. You kind of come up and you see the scene, and what are you seeing from him, and how are you feeling?
Yeah, I remember coming up the stairs and turning, basically doing a 180 because they were behind where you come up from the stairs, and seeing quality CPR being done, which then puts us at ease a little bit. We don't slow down, but we can take a deep breath and say, okay, we got quality CPR. We can get the stuff set up that we need to. So I remember coming up behind him and putting my hand on his back saying, you're doing awesome. Stay there while we get stuff set up. And I was able to get the airway set up while my partner was able to get our AED out. And then when we had our stuff set up, said, hey, we'll take over. Good job. Go ahead and step away. And then we stepped in. I was able to ventilate, and my partner checked for a pulse. No pulse, and started CPR, and I was able to ventilate. And then not too long afterwards, you guys came up the stairs.
Fantastic. So back to you, Connor. So Jared and the crew kind of jump in, they take over, they switch out AEDs, and now they're doing chest compressions, ventilating the patient. What's happening inside you at that moment? I mean, are you relieved, or a little bit are you still kind of locked in and worried for Mark, or what's happening in your head at that time?
I think I don't remember like a lot of it, just because like it was a lot going on. But when they did get there, I did feel relieved. Like, okay, I feel like I wasn't doubting myself, but I was like, oh, he's in better hands now, because like they're professionals, they know what they're doing, So I was relieved about that. But it was also like I wanted to be there to like know what happens to him and stuff.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that was probably what was going through my head, because I couldn't just leave and gotta go back to the pool and lifeguard. It's
Right.
like I'm invested here.
Yeah.
Like I couldn't do that personally myself. So.
And we're hiring at the fire department, right?
I've been told.
All right. Get that application in there.
Okay.
Sound like you're built for the job. That's something that actually, that's a common thing for us too. We see patients, and especially when it's something is kind of high acuity as a cardiac arrest, and we got to perform CPR, we drop somebody off at the hospital. That sense of kind of wanting to know how they did and what your work resulted in, if you were able to help them or not. That's a huge thing for us too.
Yeah.
We always take the opportunity to follow up if we get the chance. So I know what you're going through at that moment.
Yeah.
So I get there with my partner, and like I said, we were coming from the headquarters station a little bit further away. I think probably within a minute of the time you guys took over, and you never had to shock the patient, is that right? You never had to use
Correct.
the AED?
We didn't shock him.
Gotcha. Did you get to the point where you had to check, analyze the rhythm?
I think we got one. I'm not quite sure how long we did CPR before you guys showed up.
Okay.
I think we analyzed once and no shock.
Okay. So one of the really cool things about this story is that that one shock being delivered by Connor and the Valley's AED. Once we got through that, and the next analyze phase of the cardiac arrest dance that we kind of do came up, the AED didn't see the need to shock the patient, which meant that the shock that Connor delivered and the compressions that he had performed had done enough to change that heart rhythm back into what we call a normal sinus rhythm. So Mark was perfusing his own oxygenated blood back through his body again in just that short amount of time. So while it felt like an eternity, in just a matter of a couple minutes, the interventions you did were really able to correct the problem and get him back to stable and breathing on his own and his heart beating on his own. before there was anything else that we even needed to do. I remember when I got up and Jared was on the airway and we had another firefighter working on chest compressions. Looking at Mark initially, I was really impressed at his presentation. I mean, his color looked like it was already coming back a little bit, and it wasn't but a minute or two before I started to see some of those spontaneous respirations, seeing him starting to breathe on his own again. By the time we got the monitor, our heart monitor, hooked up, I could see a nice, tight, normal sinus rhythm, which is so encouraging when we know that we've had somebody in cardiac arrest. Because usually those things are a little bit more ugly right off the bat. Then right about the time I realized you were kind of fighting me to try to put the breathing tube in is when I knew, okay, we got a lot of good brain activity still. This could have a really good outcome. So I know my partner and I we got venous access. We started an IV, gave you some cold fluids, hypothermic therapy that we do. I put a breathing tube in. We got you dropped off. We actually followed you back to the cath lab at St. Peter's ER, and we watched your initial as they went in to do that cardiac catheterization, and they found that full LAD occlusion of your coronary artery, and talked to the nurse back there and the cardiologist, and they were pretty optimistic about your outcome at that point too. So moving past that fateful day, the first thing I heard was that we had a patient that was going to be coming in to say hey and say thank you. So got to meet a conscious and pink and warm and dry, standing upright Mark Layton. Walked into the fire station about 3 weeks later, I think it was, maybe 4 weeks, and yeah, you were looking good, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. Your brother had flown in from New York. You had your wife with you, and you came bearing gifts of chocolates and thank you cards and stuff. And what's that like for you when you get to go back? I understand you went and saw Connor too, right?
Yes.
What's that like for you when you get to go meet the kid that jumped in and
well, I'd never met Connor before, and I slept through this whole event. I don't have any real recollection of it. So I didn't know any of the people involved. I just heard what had transpired, and it's sort of a surrealistic experience. It's kind of like if you go to sleep at night and then you wake up in the morning and someone tells you that in the middle of the night some dramatic things happened, and you were there, but you have no recollection of it. But obviously, extraordinarily grateful. I mean, I've got my life,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So take us to that first moment I imagine you're in the hospital. As you're waking up, you're in the ICU,
I have this sort of fuzzy memory of kind of like gagging and choking and coughing and sputtering. And I didn't know that they'd been trying to sort of do this, trying to wean you off of the ventilator for most of the day. And a lot of it's because you're sedated with some pretty potent drugs, and it takes a while for them to just sort of get cleared out of your system. Mm-hmm. I kind of looked around a little bit and saw my son was there. He lives in LA, and sort of like, what are you doing here? And you sort of look around and you kind of get filled in a little bit as to what had happened, but you're still really kind of groggy, and so I don't really know how much of it I truly remember and how much of it I can imagine because I've been told what it was like. But it was about that period of time. Aside from sort of a sore throat and such, I was otherwise in really good shape because I hadn't had to have any major operations, and I spent. So this was Tuesday afternoon, and on Thursday, I had a pacemaker implanted, and on Saturday, I was discharged from the hospital, and 2 weeks later, I was, back in my office, part-time, sort of gradually working back into doing my thing, and you look back on it, and it's a strange experience to have experienced a near-death event, but you don't really remember it at all.
Sure.
But now you have an enhanced appreciation for every day, every time when I go and play tennis, I still play tennis poorly, but you know what? I'm playing tennis.
Absolutely. Yeah. You'll take those losses with a smile.
I hit a bad shot. At least I'm here and I'm standing. I swung the racket. This is good.
Has there been any lasting effect for you health-wise, or even down to kind of emotionally, other than kind of that?
No, I haven't had any real emotional issues. I sleep just fine, and I have a pacemaker in place, which keeps me from doing nasty things like that. And I take a couple of medications, but overall, I'm back to 100% of where I was that morning.
Fantastic. How about you, Connor? Have you noticed since that all happened, especially now, get to look at Mark and what he's doing these days, playing tennis and living life with his family just like he was before? Is there kind of a lasting impression for you, or has anything had an effect on you?
I mean, kind of. The whole event and situation was pretty impactful for me personally, just because when it came down to it, I saved his life, and convincing myself that I'm actually the one that did that was kind of the hardest part, because I was like, oh no, it couldn't have been me,
Sure.
But having that story and being able to be the guy who impacted his life has probably been the coolest thing for me, to be able to even know that in the future, if something happened, I know I could do it again, or have the confidence to do it again, which is really cool. But seeing him when he came in to see me at the Valley for the first time, and having his daughters there and his wife there, that was really cool. Seeing that he's with his family again, and he's able to have that, and that was really cool for me too.
Yeah. Here we are 2 years later, and no signs of slowing down.
Yeah, seriously.
No.
Fantastic. I love it. Well, thanks again, everybody. This has been really cool. I appreciate these guys coming in and letting us kind of hear their story and do this little reunion. So thanks again to Jared, Medic One, TCTV. Appreciate the time. So thank you guys very much. This is great.
Thank you. Yeah.
And thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.